Right, so for tonight's planting, we're going to be planting a member of the Annonaceae. So the Annonaceae is a very basal family. A basal family basically means it's split off early. It doesn't mean that they are primitive or sort of relict groups, but they have had a long time separated from the rest of the flowering plants. So this actually split off from the rest of the flowering plants before things like grasses separated from things like oak trees. They are a long way back. Palm trees are more closely related to, for example, the big Brachystegias we have here than either of them is to any member of the Annonaceae. Now, the Annonaceae is the family of the custard apples and the sourshops and such plants. They're also the family of Monoon, and this is Monoon longifolia, which I had always known as Siraca indica, which is why on the previous planting you will hear a weird little voiceover where I try and correct my constant missaying of the name Siraca. So this is an incredibly architectural tree. It doesn't produce an edible fruit, unlike a lot of the members of this family, but it does have that wonderful sort of distinct phytochemistry. So it doesn't really need to be aggressively toxic in its own right. It just has to be different, and that will be a very good defense for a lot of the plants around. So we're going to be planting this one near the grapevine that we recently planted a Terminalia manteli near. The Terminalia should form a nice little sort of trellis for the grapevine to climb over, and this should form a nice little pillar of very different toxicity to hopefully protect the grapevine from any pest that might be brought in on the wind, because this is going just to the southeast. Now to its east, because to its west there is already a Dracaena fragrans planted, I'm going to be planting a Dracaena reflexa, which will shelter it from the wind, shelter it from the morning sun, because while this is small and tender, I don't want it in too exposed a position. And then we're also going to be putting in an aloe, which will form a sort of mid-sized succulent ground cover. This is one of the ones I don't actually know which species it is yet. I'm waiting for it to flower before I can confirm. I do have a theory, but I'm not going to be putting that on screen because it's a little bit out there. I'm also going to be putting in some Calancoblos feldiana because that will form a nice low ground cover. This is an area that the grass doesn't get very high. This is an area that's quite compacted, so it should be quite visible here. It shouldn't really get lost here in the way that it could in a lot of the places I've been doing plantings, and it should have a lovely red flower which will be attractive to a lot of the pollinators and just be another little toxic barrier, and again a succulent ground cover to keep the ground cool, keep the ground from drying out, and encourage a little bit more life into this very dead soil. For part 2 of tonight's planting, we're actually going to be going just about 6 meters away, and we're going to be doing something I haven't done yet with my pendants plantings, which is I'm going to be planting the same tree. This is because these are very architectural trees. They really should look quite good as sort of pillars. So this is the area where I've planted things like the quince and the lychee. I'm probably also going to plant a couple more of the sort of semi-temperate trees here, where it's relatively shaded and relatively sheltered. And it should just be a distinct area of the garden, and hopefully having this as a pillar will mark that out. So this time the Dracaena reflexa is actually going to be going on the western side because we do have an opening there. This is going right next to a little lemon tree which is right on the corner here, and that lemon tree falls prey to 2 caterpillars. One of those is the citrus swallowtail, which is one I'm not actually worried about generally on citrus. This is a specialist of the family Rutaceae, so it doesn't really do any significant damage. It feeds on the mature leaves and can often stimulate growth unless it's in very large numbers on a very young or very ill tree. What I do worry about more is something called woolly bear, which moves into stressed and tender areas of the plant, because those have lower toxicity, and this is a generalist caterpillar, and it does tend to do a lot more damage and can actually wipe out little trees when they're still small and fragile. So hopefully having this very unrelated, very distinct in its chemistry Monoon right next to the lemon will help protect it. And because this tree has such a small footprint, it's a very narrow tree that effectively turns into a pillar of leaves, it shouldn't take too much of the light away from this lemon, because this lemon's already somewhat shaded by a very large pine that is up in the area, and for this time of year it gets a lot of shade from a very large clump of bamboo which isn't too far away, and it's going to get the same companion plants as part 1, which should have more or less the same effect on the soil of shading it and helping a little bit more life come in there, which should just improve things for everything in this area. So that should be everything for tonight. Thank you very much for watching. I hope you have enjoyed it. Please tune in again tomorrow. I will be planting something different. I actually have a clear plan for one of the 2 trees that will be going in tomorrow. I just don't have a clear plan exactly where it's going in yet, but it should be interesting to find out.